Welcome to Myth Sleep Stories, where legends from the dawn of time whisper you into rest. As you settle into bed tonight, let your mind drift away from the noise of the world. Close your eyes, feel your breath slow, and let the northern winds carry you to the realm where gods once walked, where dreams were carved in stone, and destiny was written in the stars. Tonight's story is about a creature that even the gods themselves feared to name. A wolf born not from darkness, but from fate, a being too powerful to destroy, too proud to tame. This is the story of Fenrir, the wolf who could not be bound. Long before the first dawn, when the 9 realms were still young, Odin the Allfather looked upon the world and saw both beauty and danger growing in equal measure. He had fought giants, spoken to the dead, and hung from the sacred tree to learn the runes of power. He had seen what no other god dared to see, the end of all things. Ragnarök, the twilight where gods and monsters would fall together. And in that vision, one image never left him: a wolf, colossal and unstoppable, its jaws wide enough to swallow the sky. In the gleam of its teeth, Odin saw his own death. That wolf's name was Fenrir, born of Loki, the trickster god, and Angrboda, the giantess of the Iron Woods. Even as a pup, Fenrir's presence unsettled the heavens. His fur shimmered like shadowed fire, and his breath carried the scent of winter and iron. At first, the gods believed they could control him. They brought the young wolf to Asgard, raising him among their shining halls. They thought, perhaps, that if he grew among the divine, he might learn restraint. But as the years passed, the wolf grew in strength, in intelligence, in silent understanding. His paws became the size of shields. His eyes glowed with an ancient knowing, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was deep as thunder rolling over distant peaks. Only one god dared approach him without fear: Tyr, the god of war and justice. Every day, Tyr brought Fenrir food. Speaking to him as one would to a friend, the wolf listened. He trusted Tyr, even when the others avoided his gaze. There was loyalty in his heart, though he did not yet understand betrayal. The rest of the gods, however, began to whisper. They saw in Fenrir's growing power the shadow of Odin's prophecy. They feared that the day would come when this creature, born under their care, would turn on them all. So Odin called a meeting in the great hall of Gladsheim. Golden fires flickered along the walls as the gods gathered: Thor with his hammer, Frigg with her sorrowful wisdom, Heimdall with eyes that missed nothing. Odin stood at the head of the table, his one eye dimmed with thought. He must be restrained, Odin said quietly. Not harmed, fate forbids that, but held, contained, until the final dawn comes. There was silence. Even Thor hesitated. No one wished to betray the creature they had raised like one of their own. But Odin's word was the will of Asgard, and so it was done. The first chain they forged was called Loading, thick as a mountain root, heavy with runes of strength. When they presented it to Fenrir, the wolf tilted his head. "Do you think I fear your toys?" He rumbled, his voice deep and steady. "If this is sport, I will play." He allowed the gods to bind him, standing tall, calm, unmoving. When they finished, they smiled until the wolf flexed his legs, and the chain snapped like old rope. He looked at them with quiet disappointment. Was that all? Then came Drami, twice as strong, forged by dwarves beneath the mountains. It shimmered like liquid gold in the sunlight. Once again, Fenrir agreed to test it. Once again, he waited, patient as stone. And when the gods cheered and stepped back, he twisted once and shattered it with a single roar that echoed across all the realms. Fear spread through Asgard. Even Odin, who had faced the frost giants of Jotunheim, felt the chill of doubt. The wolf looked at them, not with rage, but with realization. He saw what they were doing. He understood. "You fear me," he said softly, "and yet you raised me. You fed me. You spoke to me as if I were one of you. Tell me, All Father, do you bind all those you fear?" No one answered. Only Tyr stood forward, his gaze steady. "Not all," he said. "Only those we love too much to destroy." For a moment, Fenrir said nothing. Then he turned away, his shadow stretching across the golden fields. He did not attack, nor did he speak again. But in his heart, something had begun to break. That night, Odin walked beneath the stars, his cloak heavy with silence. He knew what must come next. The dwarves of Svartalfheim had been summoned to create a final binding, not of iron, but of impossibilities. They took the sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the breath of a fish, the roots of a mountain, and the spittle of a bird, things that could never be found, and yet somehow were. From these, they wove Gleipnir, soft as silk, light as air, and stronger than the fate that bound the gods themselves. When Odin held it in his hands, it shimmered faintly like moonlight caught in water. It did not clink like metal or burn like magic. It simply existed, quiet and eternal. He looked to the horizon, where Fenrir's shadow prowled beyond the gates of Asgard, and whispered to the night, "Forgive me, beast of destiny, for even gods cannot escape what has been written." And so the gods prepared for one final test, the binding that would either hold the wolf forever or destroy the fragile trust that still remained. Sleep now, traveler of myths. Let the sound of the wind fade into nothing, for when you wake again, the gods will have already placed their trap, and Fenrir will decide whether loyalty or fate will rule the dawn. The morning came cold and colorless. Mist rolled over the plains of Asgard, swallowing the horizon in silence. No bird sang. No wind stirred the grass. The gods stood in a circle, each avoiding the other's gaze, for they all knew what was to come. Fenrir arrived without being summoned. He could smell their fear before he saw their faces. His fur caught the faint light of dawn, and for a moment he looked less like a beast and more like a god, a creature born of prophecy and purpose. He had seen the dwarves at work, had smelled the strange magic in the air. He knew this meeting was not a game. Odin stood at the front, Gleipnir coiled around his arm like a thread of moonlight. It looked fragile, too fragile to hold anything, much less him. And yet, every instinct in Fenrir's body whispered that this was different. "Come," Odin said softly. "Let us see if even you can break this bond." The wolf tilted his head, his eyes glinting like twin embers in the fog. "You wish to play again, All-Father? I have broken your chains twice before. Why should I humor you a third time?" Odin did not answer. He only held out the silken ribbon. Tyr stepped forward, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "It is no trick, Fenrir. This is only a test of strength, nothing more." Fenrir's gaze lingered on him. He wanted to believe those words, wanted to trust the one god who had never flinched from him. "A test," he said. "Then swear to me that this is not deceit." The gods exchanged glances. No one spoke. The wolf's lips curled slightly. "You hesitate." Tyr took a deep breath. "If you wish, I will place my hand in your mouth as a token of faith. If you are wronged, you may take it." For the first time, the great wolf faltered. He looked down at Tyr, the god who had fed him as a pup, who had spoken to him as an equal. In those golden eyes he saw sincerity, or perhaps mercy disguised as courage. "So be it," Fenrir said at last. "If betrayal comes, let it come through you." He lowered his head, massive jaws opening with a sound like thunder rolling over distant peaks. Tyr stepped forward and placed his hand between the wolf's teeth. his arm trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to lose. The gods moved quickly. They wrapped Gleipnir around Fenrir's legs, his chest, his neck. The ribbon gleamed faintly in the dim light, soft as breath, weightless as mist. When they tied the final knot, the air grew still. Fenrir flexed once. The cord held. He pulled harder. It held still. His eyes widened, confusion giving way to something colder. He snarled, the sound tearing through the plains, and strained again, every muscle burning, claws digging deep into the earth. But the ribbon did not move. It tightened instead, sinking into his fur like light into shadow. He looked around and saw them, the gods, watching him not with joy, but with relief. And in that moment he understood. This was never a game. He growled, his voice trembling with fury. "You've tricked me." He turned to Tyr, whose arm still rested in his mouth. For a heartbeat, there was silence, an understanding that passed between them without words. Tyr did not plead. He did not look away. Then Fenrir bit down. The sound echoed like a clap of thunder. The god fell to his knees, blood dark against the pale earth. The wolf roared in rage and agony, thrashing, pulling, biting at the chain that would not break. Odin stepped back, his face unreadable. "It must be done," he said softly, though his voice carried no triumph. Fenrir's growls turned to words, heavy with grief and wrath. "You who claim wisdom know what this will bring. You bind me today, but you bind your own fate with me. When the end comes, I will return, and the sky itself will scream my name." The gods said nothing. They could not look at him. Only Tyr, pale and shaking, whispered through clenched teeth, "Forgive us." But forgiveness was no longer part of this world. The more Fenrir struggled, the tighter Gleipnir became. The ribbon shimmered softly, cutting through his fur, sinking into his skin without drawing blood. Its strength was not of iron, but of impossibility, and no strength in any realm could undo it. Odin raised his hand. "Fasten it to the stone," he ordered. They drove a sword through the links, anchoring the chain to the ground. Beneath Fenrir's feet, the earth groaned, and the air trembled with his roar. He bit at the gods as they fled beyond his reach, snapping so fiercely that his jaws filled with foam. The gods left him there, chained in silence. His body strained against Gleipnir, his breath coming in low, furious growls that echoed through the mountains. Days passed, then weeks, then years. At first, the gods avoided that place, unwilling to face what they had done. But sometimes Tyr would come alone, his arm bound in linen, his eyes hollow. He would stand at the edge of the cliff and watch the great wolf lying still, eyes half closed, the chains faintly glowing under the moonlight. "Do you hate me?" Tyr asked once, his voice barely more than a whisper. Fenrir did not answer. He only stared at the horizon where the stars met the sea. "No," he said finally. "I hate what you've become." And then he turned his gaze upward, to the sky he could no longer touch, to the moon he once dreamed of chasing. His body was bound, but his spirit still ran in the wind. In his mind, he could still feel the frost of Jotunheim, the warmth of the sun, the sound of snow breaking under his paws. The gods believed they had contained him, but in truth they had only given him time to grow, to wait, to remember. For prophecy does not vanish when bound. It sleeps. And in the stillness of that endless night, Fenrir dreamed of fire and ash, of oceans swallowing the sky, of Odin's final breath beneath his jaws. The wind carried his whisper across the plains, a promise, not a curse. "I will wait." And Asgard, though it stood tall and golden, began to tremble beneath that waiting. Time in Asgard began to stretch thin, like light fading through mist. Seasons still passed, but they no longer felt whole. The laughter that once filled Odin's halls grew quiet, replaced by a kind of stillness that even the gods could not name. Far to the north, beyond the shining walls, where the land turned pale under the weight of frost, Fenrir lay in silence. Years had turned into centuries, and still he did not move. His fur had grown thick with dust and snow, his breath slow as the tide. The chain of Gleipnir shimmered faintly with every heartbeat, a ribbon of light that pulsed against the cold. It had not weakened. It never would. But though his body was bound, his mind roamed free. He wandered in dreams that bled into memory, visions of running through endless forests, of Tyr's steady voice, of the brief kindness that had existed before fear took root got in the quiet of his imprisonment. Fenrir began to understand something that even the gods had not, that fate was not punishment, but patterned out every choice they had made had led them here, and every silence would lead them to the end. Sometimes the wind would carry faint sounds to his prison, laughter from Asgard, the echo of Thor's hammer, the songs of mortals praising the gods. But as the centuries rolled on, even those sounds began to fade. The gods spoke less, feasted less, and looked to the horizon more often. They did not speak of Fenrir, but they felt him, a weight that pressed on their hearts, a reminder that the world was not theirs to control forever. Tyr visited rarely now. His hair had turned silver, his armor hung loose on his shoulders. Yet still he came. He would sit by the chained wolf, resting his one good hand on the cold earth, and whisper things the others dared not say. "I dream of the end," Tyr said one night, his voice lost in the wind. Not of war, not of thunder, but of quiet, the kind that comes before everything begins again. Fenrir's eyes opened slowly. "The gods are growing old," he said. Tyr smiled faintly. "Age is not our burden. Fear is." There was a pause, the kind that held both truth and sorrow. "I was loyal," the wolf said softly. "I trusted you, and I loved you," Tyr replied. "That is why I did it." The wolf turned away. "Then love is the cruelest chain of all." After that, Tyr never came again. From his prison, Fenrir watched as the sky began to change. The auroras that once danced brightly over the northern horizon grew faint. The stars themselves seemed to drift farther apart, as though the fabric of the heavens was fraying. Somewhere in the far distance, the serpent Jarmungandr turned in his sleep beneath the sea, and the world trembled. Odin felt it too. He stood upon the highest tower of Asgard, his ravens circling restlessly above him. In his dreams, he saw flames swallowing the sky and waves rising higher than mountains. He saw the wolf's eyes opening again, bright as the dawn. He had hoped that by binding Fenrir, he might bind fate itself. But the longer the wolf remained chained, the more Odin began to feel that the binding had only ensured what he feared most. He spoke to no one of these thoughts. Not to Thor, not to Frigg. Yet all of Asgard could sense it, a tension humming beneath the golden halls, a dread that clung to even the smallest celebrations. When the gods gathered, their voices were subdued. Thor drank, but did not laugh. Frigg sang, but without joy. Heimdall, the watcher, stood longer at his post, eyes fixed on the horizon where something unseen was stirring. And beneath it all, Fenrir waited. He had stopped fighting long ago. The more he struggled, the deeper the chain bit into his flesh, though it drew no blood. Instead, he learned patience, a patience that the gods could never know. His heart beat slowly, steadily, each pulse a whisper to the world. "I remember." Sometimes, when the night was clear, his eyes would open and reflect the twin lights of the sun and moon. Mortals who wandered too close swore they saw them glowing in the dark like embers under ice. They would flee, whispering prayers, not knowing that what they had seen was not hatred, but endurance. The years rolled on like waves breaking against the same cold shore. Kingdoms rose and fell in Midgard. Mortals worshipped, fought, loved, and died, all under the watch of gods who were beginning to fade from their own glory. Odin sat often alone now, his throne cold and empty around him. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, flew far and wide, returning with whispers of change. Fires in Muspelheim, quakes in the deep, storms that refused to end. Each night, Odin dreamed of the wolf. He saw the chain glowing red-hot, saw Gleipnir shudder as if straining against its own creation. He heard a heartbeat, vast and steady, echoing from the edges of time. And in that heartbeat, he recognized his own. He began to understand that fate was not something one could fight, only fulfilled. Down in his prison, Fenrir lifted his head. The air had changed. It tasted of ash and salt. The ground beneath him quivered as if breathing. He could feel it, the world shifting, the old order dying. He knew it was not yet Ragnarök, but it was close. The gods had not spoken his name in centuries, yet every whisper of fear in Asgard was a prayer to him. He had become their silence, the truth they tried to forget. He no longer dreamed of escape. He dreamed of release, not of vengeance, but of balance. He had waited longer than any god could imagine, and in that waiting, he had learned something divine, that even destruction could be gentle when it came as part of renewal. And so, he closed his eyes and rested his head upon the frozen ground, breathing slowly, letting the world move toward its destiny. Above him, the aurora flickered once more, faint, beautiful, like the last breath of a dying song. In Asgard, Odin woke from his dream with tears in his single eye. He knew now that what he had feared all his life was not death, but inevitability. And far below, in the quiet north, the wolf smiled. The wind changed first. It came from nowhere, cold and sharp, carrying with it a sound that no one could name. It was not thunder, though it rumbled. It was not music, though it had rhythm. It was the sound of the world remembering what it had tried to forget. In the far north, where Fenrir lay bound, the air grew restless. Frost cracked like old bone. The stars flickered, as if a great breath had passed over them. For the first time in centuries, the wolf's eyes opened fully. He did not move. He did not snarl. He simply listened. Beneath the snow, the ground trembled. He felt it through the chain that bound him, the slow awakening of something deep beneath the roots of Yggdrasil. Gleipnir pulsed faintly, the light within it dimming and brightening like a heartbeat. The gods noticed it too. In Asgard, the walls began to hum, and the Bifrost bridge flickered with unnatural color. The ravens of Odin circled restlessly above the golden halls, their wings cutting through the silence. Odin himself stood at the edge of Valaskjalf, his high seat looking north. His cloak rippled in the cold wind, his single eye distant and weary. He had felt this moment approaching for longer than any could imagine. Ragnarök was stirring. It did not come like a storm, sudden and violent. It crept in quietly, like frost seeping through cracks. The gods pretended not to notice at first. Feasts continued, songs were sung, but laughter no longer reached the corners of the halls. Frigg sat by the fire one night and whispered. The air tastes of endings. Thor's hand tightened around his hammer. Then we will meet it as we always have, with thunder. But even his voice carried doubt. In Midgard, mortals dreamed of strange things, skies burning red, oceans rising, beasts breaking free. They woke in fear, whispering prayers to gods who no longer answered. The world was shifting, and even the simplest hearts could feel it. Down in his prison, Fenrir lay still, his breath fogging in the cold. He could taste the change, the salt of the sea, carried by winds that had never reached this far before. He could smell the smoke of distant fires, and the faint sweetness of decay. He did not know the time, for time no longer lived where he was kept. Yet in his chest something ancient stirred, a slow, deep thrum, like the awakening of an old memory. He thought of Tyr then, of the hand he had taken and the trust that had died with it. He thought of Odin's cold gaze, the look of a man who believed he could outwit destiny. And he thought of the silence that had followed, the centuries of solitude, of stillness. Now the silence was breaking. Gleipnir, once bright as starlight, began to darken. It still held, but the light that ran through its fibers flickered. Each pulse grew slower, heavier. The impossible things that forged it, the cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the fish's breath, trembled as if remembering they should not exist. The chain was beginning to forget itself. In Asgard, Odin summoned the council once more. The great hall, once filled with warmth, felt hollow. The fire crackled, but its glow seemed thin. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "The wolf stirs." The words hung in the air like the toll of a bell. Frigg closed her eyes. "You knew this day would come." Odin nodded. "I did, and I feared that in binding him, I gave him strength. What is restrained too long begins to remember what freedom feels like." Thor struck the table with his fist. "Then we will strike him down before he breaks loose." But Odin did not move. "And fulfill the prophecy ourselves? No. If we go to him, the end comes faster. If we wait, it will come slower, but it will come all the same." They fell silent. There was nothing left to say. Outside, snow fell across Asgard's golden streets, covering everything in pale light. The gods watched it through the windows, knowing this might be their last calm before the storm not far below. Fenrir's breathing deepened. The air around him shimmered with faint heat, as though the world itself could no longer contain his presence. He whispered to the wind, not in rage, but in memory. "You tried to bury me beneath fear, but fear is a seed, not a grave." The earth responded with a low groan, the sound of roots shifting. The ice cracked, the mountains rumbled, and from deep within the core of the world came a pulse, slow, patient, unstoppable. The ravens saw it from above. Hugin and Munin returned to Odin, their wings streaked with frost. One landed on his shoulder, the other at his feet. "The wolf dreams," said Munin. "The wolf remembers," said Hugin. Odin looked toward the horizon where dawn never came. "Then so must we." The next morning, the Bifrost Bridge fractured. A single line of light split its center, glowing red beneath the rainbow hues. Heimdall, ever watchful, pressed his ear to the shimmering arc and heard a sound like breathing, vast and steady, as if the bridge itself had come alive. "Something moves beneath us," he said. "It is not the bridge," Odin replied. "It is the world." In the frozen north, Gleipnir trembled again. The snow lifted in a circle around the wolf, spiraling upward in a silent storm. Fenrir opened his eyes, golden light spilling into the dark. He could feel the pulse of every realm through the chain, the groan of the earth, the whisper of the dead, the burning of Muspelheim. He understood now that the world was not dying. It was preparing to change. He rose slightly, testing the chain. It tightened, biting into his flesh, but he no longer strained. He smiled faintly, a sound like a low rumble in his chest. "Not yet," he said softly to the wind. "But soon." And somewhere, in a hall of fire, Surtur, the fire giant, opened his eyes. The sky cracked like glass dot. It began with a sound so deep that even the mountains shuddered. The air itself seemed to recoil, the clouds folding inward as if the heavens had inhaled. Then came the tremor, a single slow pulse that rippled through the roots of the world. In Asgard, the gods froze. The Bifrost Bridge glowed blood red for a heartbeat, then dimmed. Every creature, every soul, from the smallest sparrow to Odin himself, felt it. The rhythm that had lain silent for centuries was stirring again, deep beneath the frost. Fenrir lifted his head. The air around him swirled with snow and light. Gleipnir quivered, not from weakness, but from memory, as if it had suddenly realized that it had held too long against what was never meant to be bound. The fibers of impossibility strained. The breath of the fish, the cat's footsteps, the beard of the woman, all things that could not exist, began to remember their own nature. The chain began to forget its strength. Fenrir opened his eyes. The golden light within them burned hotter than it ever had before, not with rage, but with inevitability. He had waited through ages, through silence, through the long dreams of the dead. Now the world was calling his name again. The ground trembled beneath him. Cracks raced through the ice like lightning, spreading across the plains. Each one glowed faintly red, as though fire were awakening beneath the frost. He stood. The motion was slow, deliberate. Snow cascaded from his back in heavy sheets, and the chain tightened, desperate to hold him. But this time, the wolf did not resist with fury. He leaned into the weight, feeling every thread stretch, every rune hum, every spell flicker. He whispered, not in anger, but in truth. You held me because you feared what I would become. But you forgot? I am not destruction. I am the reminder that nothing lasts forever. Gleipnir pulsed once, twice, then shuddered. Far away in Asgard, Odin stumbled. The halls shook, goblets clattered, fires wavered. The gods rushed into the open air, their eyes turning north. The horizon burned faintly with a crimson glow. He's moving, said Heimdall. Frigg clutched Odin's arm. Then the end begins? Odin's voice was quiet. No, the end has been waiting since the beginning. Thunder rolled across the sky, not from Thor's hammer, but from something older, deeper. The clouds tore open, revealing streaks of gold and black light twisting together. The sun flickered, dimmed, and reappeared. In Midgard. Mortals stopped and stared at the sky. Some prayed, others wept. The seas grew restless. The earth exhaled. Fenrir flexed once more. Gleipnir screamed, not as metal, but as spirit. The sound echoed across the 9 realms, the cry of destiny being undone. The gods felt it in their bones. The giants heard it in their sleep. Even Yggdrasil trembled, its roots groaning beneath the weight of what was to come. With a final motion, slow and terrible, Fenrir pulled. The chain resisted, bent, and then, like ice meeting fire, it broke. The world went silent. No sound. No wind, only light, pure, golden, endless. It poured from the wound where the chain had been, spilling into the snow, into the sky, into the stars. When the silence ended, Fenrir was standing free. He did not roar. He did not run. He simply stood, tall and calm, the breath of the gods visible around him. He looked toward Asgard, not with hatred, but with understanding. The time had come. From the distance, he could see the golden city shining faintly beneath the darkening sky. He could hear the faint echo of horns, the hurried steps of gods preparing for war. Yet there was no joy in it, no triumph. Do they still believe they can escape? He murmured. His voice rolled across the world, deep and quiet as an ocean beneath ice. Odin heard it from his tower. He closed his eye. Let it be, he said softly. Thor gripped his hammer tighter. Father, but Odin raised his hand. This was always how it ends. Down below, Fenrir began to walk. Each step shook the ground, melting the frost, cracking the stone. The sky turned gold and red above him, auroras collapsing into flame. The very air trembled with energy. As he moved, his size grew, from the height of a hall to the height of mountains. His fur glowed with fire and shadow, each strand shimmering like the edge of a blade. His eyes burned with the light of the sun and moon combined. He no longer felt the weight of his chains. He felt only the rhythm of the world beneath him, the heartbeat that had called him back. The seas rose. The mountains bowed. The air filled with the scent of iron and snowdot. In Asgard, Heimdall raised his horn, Jallarhorn, and the first sound of Ragnarök tore through the heavens. The note was deep, endless, shaking every realm. Mortals woke screaming. Giants stirred from their frozen sleep. The dead in hell lifted their heads, their eyes glowing faintly with remembered fire. And through it all, Fenrir kept walking. He was not rushing toward vengeance. He was moving toward completion. Every footstep was the sound of prophecy fulfilling itself, of history folding back into the silence from which it came. Odin stepped down from his throne, cloak flowing like smoke. His spear, Gungnir, shone faintly in his hand. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "So it begins." The gods gathered behind him, their faces pale but resolute. They had fought countless battles, but this one felt different. Not a war for victory, but for meaning. The wind shifted again. It carried with it the scent of Fenrir's breath, frost, ash, and the memory of a promise long broken. He lifted his head, eyes locking on the shining gates of Asgard. "I am not your enemy," he said softly to the wind. "I am what you made of fear." The clouds parted above him, revealing the pale disk of the sun trembling in the sky. He took one more step, and the light shattered. The sky was no longer sky. It had become a wound, vast, burning, and alive. Aurora and fire twisted together, spilling over the 9 realms like veins of living light. The air smelled of ash and ice, of endings too long delayed. In Asgard, the golden streets trembled beneath the gods' feet. The walls, once symbols of eternity, cracked like clay under a storm. Every hall rang with hurried footsteps, the sound of armor, the faint, steady rhythm of fear. Thor stood at the gates, his hammer glowing with lightning that flickered weakly, like the last heartbeat of a dying star. He looked to Odin. "He comes." Odin's face was calm. "Then we go to meet him." All around them, the sky burned. The sun was dim, the moon hung crooked, and both bled faint rays of gold and silver that intertwined in the smoky air. The world tree Yggdrasil groaned, its roots stirring, its branches shedding leaves that glowed as they fell. Each leaf that touched the ground burned to ash, releasing the scent of memory. And from the north, Fenrir came. He moved slowly, his steps shaking valleys, his breath steaming through the cold. Mountains split beneath his paws. Rivers turned red with molten light. He had grown beyond measure. His head reached the clouds, his shadow stretched across the realms, but there was no fury in his stride, only certainty. He no longer looked like a beast. He looked like inevitability given form. His fur shimmered with both light and shadow, every strand shifting between gold and black. His eyes glowed not with hatred, but with clarity. The gods watched from the walls of Asgard. They remembered the day he had been bound, how he had trusted them, how they had betrayed that trust. And now, in his silent approach, they saw no vengeance, only balance. Frigg wept softly. "All-Father," she said, "is this truly the end?" Odin's single eye gleamed with the reflection of the advancing wolf. "No," he said quietly. "It is the truth we've always run from." Thunder rumbled in the distance, not from Thor's hammer, but from the heartbeat of the world. Below the clouds, other shadows moved. From the depths of the sea rose Jormungandr, the world serpent, coiling around the earth, his scales glimmering with poison light. From the south marched Surtur, the fire giant, his sword blazing brighter than the sun. Flames licked at the horizon. devouring the edges of creation. The end had begun. Odin raised his spear, Gungnir, the weapon that never missed. Its tip gleamed with ancient runes. "To your posts," he said. "Let none flee. If we fall in meaning." Thor struck his hammer against the ground, and lightning spilled upward in golden arcs. Heimdall lifted the Jallarhorn once more, and its echo rolled through every realm, calling warriors from dream and memory, from Valhalla's endless halls. The souls of fallen heroes rose, gleaming in spectral armor. They did not speak. They only walked toward the light of the bridge that led to the battlefield. And above them all, Fenrir drew closer. When he reached the plains before Asgard, he stopped. For a moment, there was stillness, a silence so heavy it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. He looked up at the city of the gods, its golden towers trembling in the wind. His voice, when it came, was soft, a voice too deep to be heard, only felt. "You feared the end so much that you chained it," he said. "And in doing so, you created it." The words carried through the air like thunder through snow. The gods shuddered, not from cold, but from recognition. Odin stepped forward, the wind swirling around his cloak. "If this is fate, then let it be fulfilled." The wolf's eyes glowed brighter. "It was fulfilled the moment you feared it." Then he moved. The ground split apart beneath his paws, shockwaves rippling through the plains. The walls of Asgard cracked. The Bifrost bridge shattered into shards of light that rained down like broken stars. The gods charged. Lightning flashed. Fire met ice. The sky became a storm of color and chaos. Thor hurled his hammer, Mjolnir, with a roar that shook the heavens. It struck Fenrir across the muzzle, sparks bursting like suns. The wolf staggered, but did not fall. His breath erupted in a blast of frost and flame that swallowed the front lines of divine warriors. Odin ran forward, his spear raised high. Gungnir met Fenrir's fur, piercing deep, but not enough. The wolf turned his head, his jaws wide, and the sky went dark in his shadow. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Odin looked up at the creature that was both his end and his mirror. In those eyes, he saw not hatred, but reflection, the same hunger for meaning, the same acceptance of inevitability. "So this is it," Odin whispered. Fenrir lowered his head. "This is balance." He lunged. The jaws of the wolf met the god, and the world broke open. A sound too vast for ears, too final for words, rippled through every realm. Mountains collapsed. Seas boiled. The stars dimmed. When the light returned, the battlefield was empty of sound. The gods still fought, but the center of the world was silent. Odin was gone. Fenrir stood over the ruins of Asgard, the wind moving softly through his fur. He looked around, at the fire rising from Muspelheim, at the serpent dying in the sea, at the heavens bleeding gold. He did not roar in victory. He bowed his head, for in that moment, the wolf understood what the gods never had, that death was not destruction. It was the breath that allowed creation to continue. As he stood there, the world tree began to tremble. Yggdrasil's roots cracked, releasing light that poured into the air like rivers. The wolf turned his gaze upward, eyes glowing like twin suns. He whispered to the sky, "The chain is broken. The silence can sing again." And from the depths of the world, where even gods do not dream, something stirred, not fire, not frost, but renewal. Silence returned, but it was not the same silence that had come before. This one was heavy, sacred, the kind that followed after something vast and eternal had finished its course. The skies were torn and gray. The golden halls of Asgard had fallen into ash, their towers leaning like the bones of a forgotten age. The great tree Yggdrasil still stood, but its branches smoldered, glowing faintly in the dim light. The realms were scattered, their borders broken, their songs reduced to echoes. In the middle of it all, Fenrir stood. He was enormous still, but something in him had changed. His eyes, once burning gold, now glowed softly, like candlelight flickering in the distance. The rage that had once consumed him had melted into stillness. The breath of the world, which had trembled beneath his weight, now rose and fell in rhythm with his own. He looked to the horizon, where the sea still boiled and the earth bled fire, and he understood the world was not ending. It was beginning again. The air shimmered with faint light, not the blinding gold of Asgard's glory, but the gentle glow of renewal. Each spark that drifted from the ground carried with it a memory. Laughter, love, loss, courage, all the fragments that made the old world what it was. They floated upward and vanished into the sky like snow melting into sunlight. Fenrir took a step forward, his paws sinking into soft ash. Beneath the surface, he could feel the pulse of life, faint but persistent. The world was already healing. From far above, the last branches of Yggdrasil creaked. A single leaf, untouched by fire, drifted down, glowing green against the gray sky. It landed before the wolf. He lowered his head to it. It was the smallest thing he had ever seen. Delicate, fragile, alive. And in that fragile life, he saw everything the gods had forgotten. The truth that endings were only pauses between breaths. For the first time, Fenrir felt peace. The wind carried whispers through the ruins, voices of gods long gone, echoing faintly through the realms. Odin's voice was among them, quiet, steady, without anger. "You were never my enemy," it said. "You were the part of me that knew how to end." Fenrir closed his eyes. The sound passed through him like the touch of a dream, and for a moment, he could almost see Odin again, standing beneath the old tree, hand resting on his spear, watching the horizon not with fear, but with understanding. The wolf lifted his head to the sky. Above him, the sun and moon hung together once more, dim but side by side. Their light spilled across the land, gentle and even. For the first time since the beginning, there was no chase, no hunger, only balance. In the distance, the fires of Muspelheim burned lower, their furious glow fading to embers. The sea stilled, its waves reflecting the pale light of dawn. Even the serpent Jormungandr, his body stretched lifeless across the ocean floor, seemed at peace, his scales glimmering faintly as the water calmed above him. The world had fallen quiet, but not empty. Fenrir walked among the ruins of Asgard. His steps were slow, careful, almost reverent. Around him, pieces of gold and stone glittered in the light, remnants of what had once been divine. He paused beside what remained of the Great Hall, Valashjalf, where Odin had once sat upon his high seat. Only the base of the throne remained, half buried in ash. Fenrir lowered his head and brushed it gently with his muzzle. "You feared me," he said softly, "but you were only fearing what you could not control." His voice was deep, steady, like the murmur of the sea against the shore. There is no control anymore, only the flow of what comes next. He turned and looked toward the horizon again. There, in the distance, the faint glimmer of light began to rise, the first dawn of the new world. It was not golden like before. It was softer, warmer, alive in a different way. As the light touched his fur, it shimmered, the gold fading, the darkness softening. His massive form began to change, edges blurring, fading into the mist. His breath no longer steamed in the cold. It blended with the wind. He felt no pain, only release. In the new morning, the earth exhaled. The rivers began to flow again. From the cracks in the ground, tiny sprouts of green pushed through the ash. The world tree, scarred and weary, began to glow from within. its roots pulsing faintly with renewed life. Fenrir watched it all with quiet awe. He understood now why Odin had feared him, because to create something eternal, one must first learn how to let go. The wind carried another whisper, soft and distant. Sleep, wolf of the end. The world no longer needs your hunger. He bowed his head. The chains that once bound him had long since turned to dust, but he could still feel their memory, not as pain, but as shape. The shape of what had been necessary to reach this peace. He took one last breath. It was deep, slow, filled with the scent of soil and snow and life. Then he closed his eyes. When he exhaled, the air shimmered, and where his breath touched, the ground blossomed. The wolf that had devoured the Allfather, that had carried prophecy in his shadow, began to dissolve into the mist. His form faded, his eyes dimmed, and his heartbeat merged with the rhythm of the world. The sun rose higher. The light softened. The ashes cooled. And in the quiet that followed, something new stirred. A song. It was faint at first, like the hum of water beneath stone. Then it grew, weaving through the air, through the soil, through the roots of the tree. It was the sound of rebirth, not loud, not triumphant, but gentle. Where Fenrir had stood, a single white flower bloomed in the ash. Its petals caught the morning light, glowing faintly, swaying in the wind. The world would remember him not as a monster, not as destruction, but as the final breath that made room for everything new. And for the first time since time began, there was peace. The air was soft again. The storms had passed, the fire had cooled, and the world, fragile, scarred, but alive, took its first quiet breath of peace. No gods walked the land now. No giants rose from the dark. The seas were still, the skies pale and open. The sound that once roared across the 9 realms was gone, replaced by the soft whisper of wind moving through new leaves. Yggdrasil, the great tree, had survived. Its bark was blackened and cracked, but its roots still glowed faintly beneath the soil. From one of those roots, a sprout had grown, small, green, stubborn. It reached toward the light that broke through the lingering mist. The world was being rewritten. Where once stood the halls of Asgard, only a meadow now remained, covered in ash and scattered gold. But beneath that ash, the earth was fertile again. Life was beginning to take hold in the ruins of what had been divine. A river ran where the bridge of Bifrost once arched, its waters shimmering with strange colors. Some said the light of the old rainbow had melted into it, blending fire and frost into one eternal current. The river hummed softly, as though it carried memory within its flow, and upon its banks 2 figures awoke. They were not gods, nor mortals as the old world had known them. Their names were Lyf and Lithracer, the last children of humanity, who had hidden through the chaos deep within Yggdrasil's shelter. They rose now, blinking into the pale sunlight, their faces calm and unafraid. The world around them was silent. Yet it was not an empty silence. It was the quiet before a song begins. Lif knelt by the water, dipping her hand into the river. The surface rippled gently, reflecting not her face, but the vast sky above. "It's warm," she whispered. Lithracer smiled faintly. "It's alive." They stood together, looking over the landscape, the remnants of mountains, the new forests sprouting from blackened soil, the faint hum of unseen creatures beginning to stir. The air was rich with scent, earth, dew, smoke, and the faint sweetness of something blooming unseen. It was a new world, born from ruin, and though they did not know it, the breath that stirred the leaves around them was not the wind. It was the echo of Fenrir, the last breath of the wolf who had once devoured the sky, now moving gently through every living thing. He had become the rhythm of life itself, the whisper between moments, the pulse beneath the soil. As the days passed, the pair began to build. They gathered stones from the ruins, branches from the fallen tree. They built no palace, no temple, only a simple shelter by the river's edge. Their laughter filled the air like music, soft and human. They did not pray to the gods. There were no prayers left to offer. But sometimes, when the wind blew through the meadows, they would pause and listen, and in the distance, they would swear they heard a faint growl, low and peaceful, echoing through the world like a heartbeat. The sun climbed higher each day, warmer than before, softer in its light. The moon followed faithfully, its silver glow washing the nights in calm. The chase had ended. The endless cycle of fear and hunger was gone. Now there was only balanced dot in the depths of the sea. Where Jarmungander's body lay, coral began to grow along his scales. Fish swam between his coils, and what had once been a serpent of death became a reef of life dot in Muspelheim. Where Surtur's flames had scorched the world, embers cooled into glowing stones. From their cracks, light seeped upward, not to burn, but to warm. The world tree's branches reached farther than before, its new leaves brighter, its roots thicker. And from its heart came a hum, a sound too soft for words, too vast for thought. It was not the sound of gods or giants. It was the sound of the world remembering itself. Lif and Lifthracer lived many years in that quiet dawn. They had children who told stories by the fire, stories of gods and monsters, of creation and endings, of wolves who swallowed the sun so that light could be reborn. And as generations passed, the stories changed. The gods became memories, the wolf a myth, the end a tale to whisper on long winter nights. Yet the truth lived on, buried deep in every heart, that endings were never truly ends. Far away, in the north, where the snow never fully melted, the place where Fenrir had once been bound remained untouched. No tree grew there, no bird sang, yet the air shimmered faintly with warmth. In the center of that stillness, a single white flower bloomed each year dot. It was said that those who found it could feel peace in their hearts, not the peace of safety, but of understanding, the peace of knowing that even the fiercest storm ends in quiet. The gods were gone, but their echoes lived on in wind and flame, in river and stone. Odin's wisdom flowed through the rivers, Frigg's gentleness stirred in the rain, and Thor's strength lingered in the thunder that rolled over distant mountains. But above all of them, unseen and eternal, was the breath of the wolf, not as destruction, but as reminder, for every dawn was born from a night that had to fall dot as the stars began to glow once more. The world settled into rhythm. The rivers sang. The trees whispered. The wind carried dreams dot, and somewhere, in the soft space between waking and sleep, Fenrir's voice lingered, low, steady, peaceful. Rest now. You have survived the fire. You have seen the end dot sleep, for the world is new again. The leaves rustled in reply. The rivers slowed. The last light of the sun melted into twilight, wrapping the land in quiet blue. Night returned, not as darkness, but as comfort. And as the stars rose, one by one, the world sighed, not in grief, but in relief. Not all was still. All was quiet. All was whole again.